Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Samech Hey Amud Beis. 4 lines from the top. The Gemara now returns to the subject of our Mishnah. When a Jew shares the same chutzner as a Nachri, according to Rabbi Meir, the Nachri is oiser the Jew's use of then carrying from the bayis to the chutzner or vice versa. That is according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says no. Although a Jew is discouraged from living together with a Nachri, that's only when there's going to be 2 Jews in the same chutzner. Only then does the Nachri oiser upon the Jews. Only when the 2 Jews have themselves the requirement to then have an eruv, chatzerus amongst them. Otherwise they'll be oiser zeh al zeh. In that case, the Nachri that shares the chutzner with them will then oiser the chutzner, whereby they will not be able to then carry from bayis to chutzner or vice versa. When is it then permissible to then, carry in such a situation? When the Jews would then rent the reshus of the Nachri, then they can go ahead and use the chutzner. Again, as we explained before, why is this so? The Chacham were concerned that since we don't want the Jews to then live in the same chutzner as a Nachri, we want to discourage them from doing so. Therefore, we'll say that it's prohibited to then use the chutzner unless you go ahead and rent out that reshus of the Nachri. Says the Gemara, Om Rav Yehuda Omar Rav, Yisrael v'Nachri b'pnimis v'Yisrael b'chitzonis. If you have 2 different chatzeros, an inner one and an outer one, the inner one can go through the outer one. If he needs to get to the reshus haram, he must then go through the reshus to the outer chutzner. So you have a situation where you have an inner chutzner that has a Yisrael and a Nachri, and an outer chutzner that has just a Yisrael. Does the Yisrael and the outer chutzner, is he going to be prohibited from carrying from his bayis to the chutzner and vice versa or not? Says the Gemara, Bo ma'aseh lifnei Rebbe v'osar v'lifnei Rebbe Chia v'osar. It came before the sages Rebbe and Rabbi Chia, and they both said it is prohibited from the Jew that lives in the outside chutzner to then carry an object from the bayis to his chutzner or vice versa. Says the Gemara, Yosef Rabbe v'Rav Yosef b'shili pirkei de Rav Sheshes. Rabbe and Rav Yosef were sitting together at the end of the drasha of the Torah lecture of Rav Sheshes. V'Yosef Rav Sheshes v'Kamar. And Rav Sheshes was sitting and he said the following. Keman Amar Rav l'Shmaitze. Like whom did Rav say this halacha according to? In other words, Rav was the one who just made this statement. When you have 2 chatzeros, an inner and an outer chutzner. Again, the inner one is a chutzner that is shared by both a Yisrael and a Nachri. The outer one is only a chutzner of a Yisrael. And Rav stated that the outer chutzner will then be prohibited upon the Jew that lives in the outer chutzner. To whom did he say this according to? Says Rav Sheshes, Rabbi Meir, like the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who only requires 1 Nachri to oiser upon the Yisrael. Asks the Gemara, before the Gemara asks, it says, Karkesh Rabbe Reshe. Rabbe nodded his head in approval of the way Rav Sheshes explained that indeed Rav's statement is according to Rabbi Meir, who says that 1 Nachri is oiser upon the Jew, even if it's only 1 Jew. Omar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Trei Gavre Ravavi, 2 great men, Kirabbanon, Litu B'hai Milsa, they made a mistake in this matter. In other words, Rav Sheshes and Rabbah are making a mistake by then saying that Rav is going according to Rabbi Meir when he said that the outer chutzner is going to be oiser upon that Jew. Because Rabbi Meir explains, if it indeed is going like Rabbi Meir, like they suggest, Lama li Yisrael b'chitzoina. What do I need a case where the Jew is on the outer chutzner? You can merely have the case where there's a Jew in the inner chutzner, or 1 chutzner, 1 Jew with 1 Nachri, and that Jew is prohibited from being moitzi being metaltil and chayfetz from the bias of the chutzner, and vice versa. What do I need to have a scenario of an inner and an outer chutzner, where the outer chutzner is only with one Jew and the inner chutzner with a Jew and a Nachri? Why? Just talk about one chutzner alone, one Jew and one Nachri. If you're going to say that that's how the Maisa was, and therefore he just recounted the Maisa, and this is the situation. Says the Gemara, that can't be. Because they asked Rav, what would be the case of the inner chutzner when there was one Jew and one Nachri? Pnimi b'makoy mahu. The one is in the inner chutzner, that Jew with that Nachri. Is that Nachri going to oiser upon that Jew the usage of his chutzner? V'amar lehen muter. He said, no, it's muter. So you see that one Nachri is not going to oiser on that one Jew. You need to have two Jews, so it cannot be Rabbi Meir. So what's the alternative? Like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who said in the Mishnah, it's only going to be prohibited when you have two Jews that will oiser upon another one, which means that they require an eruv together. Otherwise, the Nachri does not oiser upon them the chutzner. So over here, that's not so, because the Rabbanan say that when you have an inner chutzner and an outer chutzner, the inner chutzner who made their eruv, and the outer chutzner who made separately their eruv, although they did not join together with an eruv, the inner chutzner can then go ahead and carry in their chutzner. The outer can carry in their chutzner, and the inner one, who then will then be able to have passage rights through the outer chutzner, will not oiser the outer chutzner. So you see that indeed it's not zeh oiser al zeh, whereby it's not like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who says only in a case where one Jew is oiser on the other Jew, that they require to have an eruv together, does the Nachri oiser them from using the chutzner. Elo, says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva. It's like the Bar Plukta, the one who argues on the Chacham and says when you have an inner chutzner and an outer chutzner, even though each one made separately their own eruv, but since they did not enjoin in one eruv, the inner chutzner will then prohibit the outer chutzner from using their chutzner because they have passage rights. And therefore over here too, presumably we're saying that since the two Jews are oiser on each other, therefore the Nachri is going to go ahead and oiser on the outer chutzner, just like Rav had paskind, and therefore that is indeed like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Gemara asks, if that's so, like Rabbi Akiva, the Omar Regel Mutez Mekaymo Iser Shalom Mekaymo, then Lamali Nachri Afil Yisrael Nami. Why do we have to come on to a case where the Yisrael is together with the Nachri? Just say the fact that there is two Jews, one in an inner chutzner, one in an outer chutzner. The inner chutzner will then oiser on the outer chutzner because he did not enjoin together with the outer chutzner, and he has passage rights through the outer chutzner. So the fact that he then did not enjoin in an eruv together with the outer chutzner prohibits the one in the outer chutzner to use the chutzner. Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua la'olam k'Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov u'k'Rabbi Akiva. Really, it's like both Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that require two Jews, and like Rabbi Akiva that says that the inner chutzner will then oiser on the outer chutzner if he did not enjoin together with them to make an eruv. We asked, if so, what do you need to have a case of a Nachri? Says the Gemara, because they did make an eruv. The Jew in the inner chutzner made an eruv together with the Jew in the outer chutzner. And therefore, if it was just the two Jews alone, they would go ahead and enable, they would permit each one to then carry in their chutzner and also allow the one in the outer chutzner to use his chutzner. But the reason over here why it's also for the outer chutzner to be using his chutzner is because of the Nachri. Now the Gemara asks the other way. Until now we've been discussing two chatzeros, an inner and an outer. And we said the case is, until now, the inner chutzner is a Yisrael and a Nachri. The outer chutzner is just a Yisrael. And the halacha is that the outer chutzner cannot carry from the bias to the chutzner and vice versa because it's like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov together with Rabbi Akiva over here. Now ask the Gemara the other way, when you have two chatzeros, but this time the inner chatzer is with one Yisrael, and the outer chatzer is the Yisrael and the Nochri. Does the outer chatzer, is it prohibit the person living in the outer chatzer to use his chatzer? Boy minei Rabbi Elazar may Rav. Rabbi Elazar asked Rav the following question: Yisrael v'Nochri b'chitzoyno v'Yisrael b'pnima is, if you have a Yisrael and a Nochri in the outer chotzer and Yisrael in the inner chotzer, can the Yisrael in the outer chotzer use his chotzer or not? Mao, what's the din? Hasam in the first case, Taimo mishum d'shchiach d'dair. There, it was prohibited for the person in the outer chotzer to use his outer chotzer because it's common for him to go ahead and live in the outer chotzer, to live in the outer chotzer alone. Why? To live in the outer, and to live there, meaning even in the one in the inner chotzer would live with the nochri. The mirtas nochri v'sovar, because the nochri in the inner chotzer was always on edge. He was always concerned, and he would think, Hashta osi Yisrael v'amar li Yisrael dahava gaboch heicha, because the Jew in the outer chotzer would come and check on him and say, where is the Jew that was living with you in your chotzer? So the Nochri was always concerned about harming the Jew. So therefore, that's why it was something that was considered to be shchiach. And therefore, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov would be concerned over here and make the gezerah and say that indeed the Jew in the outer chotzer cannot go ahead and use that chotzer. Aval hocha aminale nafik azale. But over here in this case, the Nochri can reason that and say, can give an excuse to the Jew who inquires about the Yisrael in the outer chotzer that is with him, and said, when he asked him, where is that Jew with you in the outer chotzer? He left. He left the chotzer. He went to the mavui, he went to the Rishus HaRabim. And therefore, there's not a concern according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. And therefore, he would be able to then go ahead and easily use the outer chotzer by carrying from the bayis to the chotzer and vice versa. O Dilma, or perhaps, Hachanami mirtas. So too over here, the Gentile, the Nochri, is concerned. He's scared. The Sover, he says, Hashta osi Yisrael v'chazili. Now, the Jew's always going to be checking up on me, and he'll see me if I harm the Jew. And therefore, it will be equally also like the first case for the Jew in the outer chotzer to use the chotzer without renting out the space from the Nochri. Or Marley. So what's the din over here in this case? Again, with the inner chotzer being occupied by just one Yisrael, whereas the outer chotzer being occupied by Yisrael and a Nochri. Or Marley. The response that he gave was, this is Rav's response, Tein lechacham v'yechkam. Oh, he brings a pasuk. Give to the wise man and he'll become wise. Further, he'll become wiser. And therefore the answer was affirmative indeed, just like the first case. It will then oiser the one in the chotzer, in the outer chotzer, to use the outer chotzer. So too in this case, it will osir the outer chotzer as well. Reish Lakish v'talmidei the Rabbi Chanina ikloi lahu pundak. Reish Lakish and the Talmidim of Rabbi Chanina, they visited a certain pundak, a certain inn. Now this pundak, this inn, shared a chotzer together with a Nochri, as well as there was other Jews in that chotzer that had houses in that chotzer. And the owner of the pundak was there, but the one that he rented out was not present. In other words, he already rented out the inn to a different Nochri. And that Nochri wasn't present, he went away. But he himself, the original owner, was present. So Amru, they said, Mahu the Megar Mine, could we go ahead and rent from this Nochri, who is really the original owner, even though he rented it out and that Nochri is not there? If the original masker cannot cannot remove the soicher from his being a soicher, then lo tiboy, that's not going to be a question. Deloi agrina, certainly we cannot rent out from this maskir from the original owner because he doesn't have the rights to the inn at this point. Kitiboy, but our question is, Heicha de mati misalikli, when the masker can be misalik the soicher and remove him from the picture and gain his in back. What's then? Could we rent out from him or not? Kivan the mati misalikli agrinon, since he's able to then remove the soicher from the schirus, then we can go ahead and rent from him. And therefore, that would be allowing us to use the chutzner. Or perhaps right now, at the present state, he did not remove the soicher because the soicher is not around, and therefore we cannot go ahead and rent from him. Omar lehen Reish Lakish said to them, Niskar, let us go ahead and rent out from the maskir, because the suffix divreihem lahakil. We'll say lekula, since over here we're talking about a case that is dirabanan, and we can go ahead and say misafek lekula. So therefore, we can go ahead and rent. Niskar, let us rent. And when we get to the sages in the south, we'll ask them, what is the proper way to do? Also, they came, Shiloh Rav Afis. They went and they asked the sage of Afis what to do in such a situation. Omar lehen, he said to them, Yofe asisem shesechartem. It's good what you did, but you rented out. That was the correct thing to do.